that come in the eye go through this nasolacrimal canal and end up down there in your nose. And when we dissect the orbit, we will see where tears come from and how they end up in there. And when we go into the nose, you'll see that tube going down into there. This part of the maxilla was called the anterior lacrimal crest, and this part, this little ridge here in the lacrimal bone, is called the posterior lacrimal crest. And like I say, they surround this nasolacrimal groove and the nasolacrimal canal, which is going down into the nose. And there's where the tears go. That's where the canal goes. But it's not on the outside. It should be, it's dashed because it's way down in there. Okay, back to the underside and back to this complex sphenoid bone. So we saw it out here on the side. What's that area right there called? Good, hadn't changed a bit. Good. Okay, so the sphenoid from the bottom. This whole area in here, and if you look at it in 3 dimensions, you'll see there's a couple of plates. There's 2 sort of plate-like structures down in there. Okay, that area is known as the pterygoid region, pterygoid process. This is the medial pterygoid plate, and the one lateral to it is called the lateral pterygoid plate. Okay, right here on the edge of this medial pterygoid plate, there's a little hook-like structure known as the hamulus. And we will dissect that out during one of the later dissections in this course. And there's a really cool muscle that wraps around that hamulus. The area between the medial and lateral pterygoid plates is referred to as the pterygoid fossa. So there's a little medial plate, a big lateral plate, and the area in the middle is referred to as the pterygoid fossa. And sort of behind that, on the back end of the sphenoid here, there's a depression, which is referred to as the scaphoid fossa. And there are various muscles that attach in these areas that we'll learn about later. But when you say a muscle comes from the scaphoid fossa, you probably want to know where that is. Okay, in the back end of the sphenoid bone here, there are some holes that will be very important later. There's a big one up front known as foramen ovale, through which a very important part of a cranial nerve that originates on the brain in the inside manages to get out of the brain case and come down and do all sorts of cool stuff down here. Behind it is another little bitty hole, a little or smaller hole, known as the foramen spinosum. And then there's a little, right where the sphenoid comes back here and articulates with this temporal bone back over here, there's a little bitty bump. It's referred to as the sphenoid spine, the spine of the sphenoid. Yes, Amanda?
The spine of the sphenoid that's between the mastoid process and the foramen spinosum?
It's right behind foramen spinosum.
But in front of the mastoid process?
Oh yes, well in front.
Okay.
Yes, the mastoid process is way back over here.
But it's medial to the eardrum hole.
It's medial to the eardrum hole, which is right there, and medial to where the lower jaw articulates.
There you go.
See, is this one painted? Little purple thing right there. Where's your, no, it should be back up. You're back in temporal bone there. That's where this thing right there. Right? Yes.
Number 4 so far?
No, that's it should be right there. It's not very clear.
Yeah, I think so.
There's your speaker. There's the speaker.
Been an hour yet?
Purple thing.
Yeah, no, it's very
It's gonna be tough.
But I thought
Just
you
medial to where the lower jaw
It is
comes in, it's part of the sphenoid.
I mean, we're gonna be tested on
Yes,
this again.
yes, so here's your jaw here, so it would be that thing.
Like, even though we have to quiz, the next test is so we're not gonna hear this one. This is just a quiz. Like a quiz, and then we have a test. The test is on everything, the muscles.
Moving right along. Our friend the temporal bone. Okay, so as we said before, this whole area, this flat area, but also including this, is the squamous portion of the temporal bone. This part forms the side wall of the brain case. Okay. This is the tympanic region. Okay, the eardrum, the tympanic membrane actually lies in that hole there. This part down under here, you'll see it better from inferior view, is called the petrous portion, the rock-like portion. That's one of the most solid areas of the skull. If you lived in the Middle Ages and you were in the habit of burning people at the stake and stuff like that, you know, that's one of the parts that's left over at the end. That and the sacrum. You know, that's why the sacrum is called the sacrum. If you burn somebody at the stake, the sacrum, because it's such dense bone, it doesn't burn, so it must be something sacred about it. If you're ever on Jeopardy, remember that. Okay. This pointy thing down here that may or may not be in your skulls, because it tends to break, is known as the styloid process. Your skulls have a styloid process?
That thing.
Oh yeah, you got a big one right there. Yeah. It can often be. I'll show everybody behind you.
Yeah.
Behind you. And when we get to when we start dissecting the under the skull, you'll find processes, things that originate on the styloid process. And then behind, okay, take your time. Behind that is this big, huge, bumpy thing known as the mastoid process. Okay.
Behind you or
Behind it and lateral. You see it? It's big. It's hard to miss. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, where's your picture?
What?
Where's your picture?
We're getting there. Again, okay, here's the temporal bone from the bottom. Right? So here's the zygomatic process, the part that's going to form that arch from the back. The squamous portion, most of it's on the side wall of the brain case. There's that styloid process, which you saw before. Here's the tympanic part, so the eardrum's lying in this hole. Here's this petrous portion, right? This big area here. It's got a hole in it too. This is the solid part, okay? And then back here, seen foreshortened so it doesn't look as big as it is the mastoid process. Lateral and posterior. Same stuff we saw from the side. Some are more visible from one angle than the other. Here, just to make it simpler. Okay, but you already know this. This is just a summary of everything you've learned in the past 15 minutes or so. So as I said, so here's our temporal bone. There's the zygomatic process, forming the arch. Okay, the mandible, the lower jaw, is going to articulate right here. That's why it's called the mandibular fossa. And then there's a sort of a ridge in front of it known as the articular tubercle. So when you open your jaw, the part of the mandible that's there slides forward up on that articular tubercle. There's the styloid process. That's old news. Here's, okay, a suture, a fissure. It's actually a fissure. There's a gap between this part where the eardrum lies, known as the tympanic part, and the squamous part out here, known as the squamotympanic fissure. So it's at the back of where the ear tube lies. There's that ear hole again, the external acoustic meatus. Okay, here's something new. Here's a great big hole that I pointed out but didn't give you the name to. That's the carotid canal. Okay, that's where the internal carotid artery is going to come up and go into your brain. It's right in the edge of this petrous portion of the temporal bone. There should be a great big hole there. And then behind that, right behind that carotid canal, there's a little bitty hole known as the tympanic canaliculus. Okay, moving further on, again, there's that external acoustic meatus. Okay, there's another potentially little hole there, but you don't have to know it, but there is one there known as the mastoid caniculus. Stylomastoid foramen. You find that styloid process. Right behind it is a little hole known as the stylomastoid foramen, which we will learn more about in a couple of dissections, because there's a nerve that comes through there. Okay, here's the mastoid process out here, right? Behind that mastoid process is a sort of a groove known as the digastric groove. And there's a muscle that's going to originate in there. There's another groove medial to that, known as the groove for the occipital artery. Guess what's going to pass through there? Right, good. Okay, there's another little foramen back here between the mastoid area of the temporal bone and the occipital bone here, known as the mastoid foramen. And way back up all the way around, here's where this petrous portion is. This area up here is known as the jugular fossa. Okay? Yeah, this temporal bone's a real mess. Let's spend some time with it. Okay, more to come. Right, so here was that squamotympanic fissure, right, between the front of the tympanic portion and this jaw joint here. And sometimes it should split as it gets more medially, giving rise to two more fissures, a petrosquamous fissure, because this is the petrous portion back over here, and a petrotympanic fissure. So the one that's more anterior is the petrosquamous fissure. The one that's most posterior is the petrotympanic fissure. Bet you didn't know all that was going on in your ear, did you? Okay, now something else yet again. So there is a little canal traveling. Here's this petrous portion, right? There's your carotid canal. Coming from this area where the sphenoid and the petrous portion of the temporal come together, there's a little tube going back in there, known as the musculotubal canal. Ta-da! Moving further back, the occipital bone. You wondered why we didn't have a lab today, didn't you? This is going to go on forever. Okay. We'll be done by tomorrow morning for your other class. Okay. The occipital bone, the beautiful lilac occipital bone. Okay, up front. Right here, what bone is that? Vomer. What's that?
Allah.
No, that's the ala bone. What's this yellow thing? No, keep trying. Yeah, but what part of the sphenoid?
Lateral oblique.
No, keep trying. It's the medial pterygoid plate. Right? There's the pterygoid hamulus. There's the lateral plate. There's the scaphoid fossa. All this good stuff that you learned minutes ago. Okay, so back to our friend the occipital bone. There's a bump right here, right between the foramen magnum back here. What goes through the foramen magnum? Spinal cord, good. Between the front of the foramen magnum and this vomer up here, there's a big bump known as the pharyngeal tubercle. Anybody want to guess what originates on the pharyngeal tubercle?
Adam's apple?
What? The what? Okay, how about something called the pharynx? Now, anyone want to guess what the pharynx is? It's a fancy word for the back of the throat. You can't say back of throat, you have to say pharynx from now on. Okay? Okay, so now you know where the back of the throat attaches. Okay, there's a, here, you know what these things are called? Occipital condyles. What articulates with the occipital condyle? What?
C1.
The atlas, right. So your first cervical vertebra, the atlas, articulates with these occipital condyles on the base of the skull. Good. Okay, right sort of anterolateral to the occipital condyles is a hole that goes into the brain case known as the hypoglossal canal. And there is a cranial nerve that passes through the hypoglossal canal. Anybody want to guess what it's called? The hypoglossal nerve. See? It all fits together. Okay, so there's a hypoglossal canal which you should be able to find and stick a straw through. Occipital condyle, foramen magnum. Behind this occipital condyle, there's another little hole known as the condylar canal. And as you move even further back, so we're still in this occipital bone back here, right? There's an inferior nuchal line. Nuchal's a fancy word for neck. Then there's a superior nuchal line behind that. And connecting these two at the midline is a ridge known as the external occipital crest. Okay, in the midline. And then finally at the back there, where your right and left superior nuchal lines come together and your external occipital crest comes together, is the external occipital protuberance. Yeah, exactly. And if you're measuring from the front of the, well, it's often one of these landmarks known as inion. It's the furthest point back on the skull usually. Okay, so there's the occiput, which is much simpler than the temporal bone. A few other odds and ends. This junction between the sphenoid bone and the occipital bone is the spheno-occipital synchondrosis, which is basically just the place where these two parts come together. And this thing that's always a nightmare to